A lot of controversy with the college football playoff final ranking reveal. Notre Dame taking their ball and going home. We have a lot to talk about, including some coaching searches, some bowl games, and some other odds and ends. I'm John Canzano. You can find my work at johncanzano.com. He's Jon Wilner. You can find him at wilnerhotline.com. Wilner, let's jump right in with the final CFP ranking reveal. What was your reaction when all this went down?
Boy, there was so much buildup. And my first thing is, gosh, thank goodness it's over, because this whole thing starts on the first Tuesday in November, right? November 4th, I think it was. And you got 5 weeks of it. Who's going to end up where? Who's going to get left out? So I was just glad we're done. I was looking at the two things were, for me, Duke versus James Madison, and then the Miami, Alabama, Notre Dame controversies. And there was no way somebody wasn't going to be annoyed. They box themselves in every year with the weekly ranking show, and we can get into that if we want. But you knew somebody was going to be pissed. I thought actually Miami was going to get left out, but the committee pulled a fast one by not moving Alabama, hence putting Notre Dame and Miami in direct competition with each other.
Yeah, I thought there was some interesting politics. It's the best word I have for it. Politics that were going on behind the scenes here with this stuff. And one of them is I just feel like there's an undeniable message that has been being given to Notre Dame. Get yourself into a conference like everybody else is the message that I think was sort of you don't have a conference commissioner like Greg Sankey or Tony Petitti out there pandering and banging the drum for you, or threatening to not participate in the playoff. The playoff could go on without Notre Dame. And in fact, it's going on without Notre Dame this year. I also think the ranking reveal shows that came every Tuesday in the run up to this thing were a problem, because in the end, we find out that none of it mattered. Like, why were we even watching? Because the committee in the end, the figure skating committee, so to speak, in the end, just did what figure skating committees do. They gave the 10 to the contestant that they wanted in the bracket. And Alabama losing by 21 to Georgia in the SEC title game didn't matter, but BYU getting boat raced by Texas Tech did matter. And oh, by the way, you look back at Notre Dame's losses from the early part of the season. They lost twice before September 15th by 1 point and 3 points to really good teams. And they had a freshman quarterback. And those seem to matter more than Alabama getting beat by Florida State in the early part of the season and then losing badly in the SEC title game to Georgia. It didn't make any sense, and it's problematic. And I think, they're out there trying to justify it, Wilner, but they sound ridiculous.
They do, but it's unavoidable with the system with those Tuesday shows. It's part of the contract with ESPN that they got to do the 5 shows leading up to the final rankings. And so by the very nature of doing that, they end up getting boxed in, and they look hypocritical, and there's no transparency, and they're talking in circles. It's going to happen every year. It has happened every year. It's going to continue to happen every year. I actually thought, I don't view Alabama and BYU's losses as apples to apples at all. BYU played 2 games the whole season against a team that was playoff worthy and got crushed both times. 2 auditions, 2 wipeouts. Texas Tech beat them by a combined score of 63-14, right? And that's it. Those are the only 2 games BYU played against a playoff worthy team. Alabama lost, yes, by 21 points, but to a team that it had already beaten on the road. That's the difference to me. Alabama lost badly to a team that it had already lost badly to. Alabama lost decisively to a team that had beaten on the road. I didn't think there was any chance, or very little chance, that the committee was going to punish the number 1 seed in the SEC championship game for losing to a team that it had already beaten on its home field. That would have been, I think, a bridge too far, and I think the SEC could have just hit detonate on the whole thing if that had happened. And the politics, I totally agree with you on. They weren't comparing Notre Dame and Miami to each other until the last week after neither of them had played because BYU lost so bad they moved
Yeah.
BYU out. I was thinking last night that they were going to drop Alabama one spot for the loss to Georgia. So Alabama would be between Notre Dame and BYU, or Notre Dame and Miami, creating the buffer so that the head-to-head didn't get pulled into the conversation. And that's how they would justify Notre Dame in and Miami out. But they ended up keeping Alabama where they were, moving BYU, which created the head-to-head between Notre Dame and Miami. And I'm glad in that case that they put Miami in. If everything else is equal, you have to account for the head-to-head.
You have to account for the head-to-head, but I also think, look, prior committees told us that how you're playing more recently matters, right? Florida State, it mattered that they didn't have their quarterback. It's how you're playing more recently. But that's not what the committee did with this Alabama-Georgia thing. And certainly it looked to me like they were afraid of the SEC and afraid of ESPN and ESPN wanting to protect, the SEC. A lot of blocking and tackling going on by the talking heads on ESPN, justifying the 5 SEC teams in the field. We're going to take a look at the bracket here. I want you to kind of tell me where your eyes go, Wilner. But before I get into the bracket, can I just point something out real quick?
Yeah, sure.
The odds makers on Sunday morning had Notre Dame as a 9-1 shot in Vegas on the board to win the whole tournament. The odds makers now have Alabama at 20-1 and Miami at 22-1, Wilner. Why are we not just letting the odds makers pick the field? Wouldn't the fair thing be to get, Jimmy the Greek or whoever's making the lines in Vegas, whoever's in the sports book, get these sports books, the Westgate Superbook together with everybody else and say, look, you pick the field. I kind of think they would give us a more accurate field than the selection committee.
Well, it would be based on their power rankings, right? And head to head, the odds you just gave us tell you everything. Miami might not make it in that case. Notre Dame would. The head to head would not mean as much because they're using their power rankings. There's a lot of folks who think that would be a better system. The one of the problems with that though is, are you giving the group of 5 an opportunity? Are you rewarding conference championships? Right? The sport is in this. It has a very difficult relationship right now with the conference championship games, and everything it's doing is pushing us into a world where they don't matter at all, and yet the conferences are still kind of clinging to them, and the networks like them. And the SEC, the SEC championship games are worth like $75 million. It's a lot of money. So there's this yin yang thing with the championship games, and they don't mean as much. We saw that. The Big Ten game was terrific, but it actually didn't mean very much for the bracket. So I don't know that giving it to the bookies is the best way to do it. I don't know that giving it to a committee based on former coaches and ADs is the best way to do it. Giving it straight to the computers, kind of like the BCS, is that? I don't know. But I do know that they got to have more transparency. Whatever system they use, they have to be more transparent. One of the committees, the many ways the committee is undermining its own credibility and undermining faith in the system is the lack of transparency with the data it uses and the way it comes to its decisions.
The reason that they're clinging to the conference championship games is because the TV networks have already paid for them. So that's it. They know Alabama's got to play Georgia because the game's on ABC and ESPN, and the Big Ten championship game is on Fox. And so they've got this contractual thing going on where, they know that they can't give it back. The networks don't want to give it back. But here's, something that crossed my mind as we were watching these teams play. Like, we should have been seeing all those teams that were on the bubble play each other on championship weekend. Why can't the conferences all just give their game back? Give it back to the network and say, look, we're going to give it back, and let's let the selection committee pick the matchups in championship weekend. And let's say, it's teams like 8 through 12 that are playing each other instead of these conference championships that don't really matter anymore. Because I would have liked to see, Miami and Notre Dame not be on the sofa, because the committee basically just said, hey, we like Notre Dame's posture on the sofa less than we liked Miami's posture on the sofa, and so it was, I want to see these teams in action. I want it settled on the field.
Yeah.
And so I kind of think maybe that's the future, and maybe we have to get beyond these TV contracts to figure that out. But maybe the future
Vanderbilt tried to do that. Vanderbilt
Yeah.
tried to set up a game, good for them. It was very smart thinking.
What do you see when you see the bracket? All right, bracket comes
Okay.
out, let's kick this around. Obviously at the top left corner of the bracket, you got the 5-12 game. It's Oregon and James Madison in Eugene on Saturday night, or late Saturday game. It's not Saturday night. It's 4:30 kickoff in Eugene. But what do you see there in that Oregon JMU game?
That should be a blowout. Oregon, to me, they've got a great draw. This is exactly why you want the 5 seed. They're at home against JMU. They're going to win by 5 touchdowns. Then they get to play Texas Tech. They're going to be fresher. Texas Tech is going to have the rust. It's in Miami. No advantage to Texas Tech there. Oregon's got a great chance to get into the semis and a rematch with Indiana.
It worked out beautifully for Oregon. This is what Oregon wanted. No one's going to say it, but this is exactly what Oregon wanted. They wanted to be the 5 seed. They wanted to host. They get James Madison team they should handle pretty easily. James Madison's coach, is off, over in LA on Monday and Tuesday. I tried to get him on my radio show, and James Madison told me he's not going to be available early in the week because he's busy with his new duties at UCLA. This is exactly what Oregon wanted. They get a tune-up game. Then they get Texas Tech. And by the way, presumably they would get Indiana in that semifinal round if that's what it comes to. And, I like that they don't have to play Georgia or Ohio State until they get to the national championship game.
Well, that's the other thing I was going to mention is the first place my eyes go here is the bottom half of the bracket with Ohio State and Georgia paired together as the 2-3. And you knew that was going to happen as soon as Ohio State lost, basically, the missed field goal, so it's not going to go into overtime. As soon as Ohio State lost, you knew they were going to be with Georgia. And that was the side of the bracket to avoid at all costs. Because if you're Ole Miss or A&M or Miami, Tulane, you got to beat one of them in the semis or in the quarters, and then you got to beat the other one in the semis. And those, you could make the case that, Georgia and Ohio State are, the most talented teams. I'm not going to say they're the best teams. Indiana's awfully good, but if I'm a coach, the number 1 and 2 teams I don't want to play in this playoff are Ohio State and Georgia. I'd take my chances with anybody else. So that's where I see it, and that could be a phenomenal semifinal game. They played a great semifinal in, what was it, 2021? CJ Stroud.
Yeah.
Could be an awesome game.
And I looked at it too from kind of an Indiana perspective. If I'm Indiana, I also like how this broke because, you're getting the winner of Alabama, Oklahoma, and then you're playing the winner of Texas Tech, Oregon, and you're getting to the national championship game without having to play Ohio State or Georgia. I mean, Indiana's win in the conference championship game put them in that position. So good on them. Bottom half of the bracket is brutal. Look, we have 2 group of 5 teams in this bracket, and some people out there are going, "Hey, wait a minute, we're missing the bigger point. Tulane and JMU both being in this bracket, this is a problem." And I would say to that look, you much in the same way that the NCAA tournament includes conference champions in a lot of conferences that we know aren't going to win the tournament. That's what a tournament is. That's what makes it sort of special, that you feel like you have something to play for, and you're playing to get onto this stage and get into the big dance in the NCAA tournament, or get into whatever we're calling this thing in football. But, for those that would say, hey, look, these are going to be blowout games. Tennessee got boat raced by Ohio State in the opening round last year. That's going to happen. Someday you're going to have a 10, 11, 12 seed win a game in this thing and not have it be an underseeded Ohio State team that's advancing, as a 9 or an 8. Yeah. So I think you have to accept the group of 5 teams that are in this bracket. You have to know that they're playing for something. It matters. Right. I look at the regional breakdown of these teams. Oregon's the only team coming from the western part of the United States. That's not great for the sport. That's got to change. It'd be good to see Boise State or one of the Pac-12 teams, next year and beyond have a shot to get into this bracket, maybe have a little more representation.
Yep.
But I like seeing JMU. I like getting to know, a little bit more about Tulane. I think this is good for the sport.
Well, JMU it's not a JMU problem. It's an ACC problem because the ACC produced a 5-loss champion and had a tiebreaker. I don't even want to get into how screwy their tiebreaker system is. That's a whole nother topic that we could get into. Is the conference, the size of the conference, the lack of head-to-head play among good teams in the conferences because they're too big. The tiebreakers, that's all a whole nother story. JMU's in because the ACC produced a 5-loss champion, right? So it's not JMU's fault. The bottom line, though, is that everybody seems to forget on Twitter when you see these people going, if they tried to get rid of the G5s, there'd be a lawsuit in like a half a second, right? There would be a collusion lawsuit filed by that group of schools. That's why they have the access in the first place. They were worried about getting sued when they created this bracket. So you can't exclude it's almost half of FBS, the group of 5. So that's a non-starter. They're going to get in. They're going to have access. And if they go to 16 or they go to 24, they're going to have access in those 2. It would be good if Tulane or JMU played a competitive game. But like you said, there's plenty of non-competitive games last year. The NFL playoffs have blowouts. The NBA playoffs have first-round sweeps. It's just obviously March Madness has tons of blowouts. It's just part of the deal.
Part of the deal. Look at the bracket again. If you, go into maybe some of the other matchups, give me what the game in the first round that you're most interested in seeing.
Well, certainly the game in the 8-9, I think, is going to be Alabama-Oklahoma. That was a terrific game. Was that about 3 weeks ago? Oklahoma won in Tuscaloosa. So that's one of 2 rematches, right? Alabama-Oklahoma, and also Tulane Ole Miss is a rematch. Ole Miss beat them by 35 early in the season. We'll see how the Alabama-Oklahoma game turns out. I do think it's going to be a kind of a slugfest. Neither team's got very good offense right now, and we'll see how that goes. Interestingly enough, Indiana is going to face the same problem Oregon had as Big Ten champions that Oregon faced last year. 3.5-week break after the Big Ten championship game. They're going to be playing a team that is going to have just played 10 days earlier and is going to be sharper, and it'll be very interesting. Last year, the teams that had the opening round buys in the quarterfinals, they were all multiple touchdowns behind in the first quarter of their quarterfinal games.
Yeah. It's too long a layoff. I mean, the coaches you talk to, I talked to the former Washington State coach, Jim Walden, about this. I said, what happens after a week off, or what happens after 10 or 12 days? What happens at 20 days? And he said the most he'd want to go is just like a normal bye week. Like you miss a game and then you come right back and play, which most of these teams that didn't play in the conference championship games are going to do.
Do you see where the Oklahoma-Alabama game is? That's the Friday night game, right?
Yeah.
There's one game on Friday the 19th, and then there's a triple header on Saturday the 20th, because we know what else is going on Saturday the 20th.
Yep.
NFL doubleheader. So ESPN smartly picked the best of the opening round games, Alabama-Oklahoma, and put it on Friday night where there's no NFL competition.
And took the early Saturday game.
Took the early Saturday game. That's right. Oregon, JMU, and Tulane, Ole Miss are both head-to-head with big-time NFL games on Saturday the 20th.
I am interested in that Tulane Ole Miss game, because what is Ole Miss going to be like without its head coach? What are they going to come out on fire and galvanized, or are they going to come out looking a little flat and a little disorganized and not focused and maybe find themselves in a game with Tulane? I think that's one to keep an eye on. But I also think the Alabama-Oklahoma game is interesting to me for another reason. I think the entire country outside of Tuscaloosa is going to be with Oklahoma in this game. I think people are mad about what happened with a 3-loss Alabama team getting into this playoff. I think you're going to see a lot of that sentiment leading up to kickoff, with people rooting against Alabama, rooting against the SEC. I think it's apparent what's going on there. I also think another thing, when you take a look at Oregon's path, Oregon has got the home game in Eugene in the opening round. Let's say they win. Well, then they're what? They're going to Florida. They're going to Miami to go play that second round game with Texas Tech. Then they're going to Atlanta. Then they're going potentially, if they win that game, maybe against Indiana, then where are they going? They're going back to Florida. If you're Dan Lanning, do you just set up a satellite camp out in Georgia or Florida? Are you in Jacksonville for a while? Like, what fans are going to go out and travel for all these games,
Yeah,
Wilner? I think there's a real problem there with what they're asking of fans. And it came up a year ago with Oregon fans maybe going to the Big Ten championship game in Indianapolis, then going to the Rose Bowl. And then, they were, which game can you afford to go to? Because there's the people that will say, hey, I'll go to one game, but nobody's going with this team throughout the course of the playoffs for every round.
It's brutal. It's brutal for the fans. If you're Oregon, you are schlepping to Miami, and then where do they feed in for the semis?
They go to Atlanta. They go to Atlanta. They go to the.
You could
Peach Bowl. They go to the Peach Bowl.
There's not as much time in between. Was there 8 days or so? The other thing is, and I don't have it in front of me, but Oregon is a quarter system school. So when do they start class in January? I don't know the answer, but if it's not till later, then maybe they do just set up camp out there. I don't know. It's probably a little bit purgatorial. It's a little too much time to set it to stay.
Yeah. I'm just saying, it's a lot of back and forth.
It's a lot of schlepping. It is a lot of schlepping, but that's what the system is.
Yeah.
And they get the benefit. They do have that extra game. You get the benefit of the home game. I think that's worth, to me, playing at home is worth having to go play in Frankfurt.
Look, Notre Dame is saying they're not going to play in their bowl game. A lot of people declaring the bowl system dead. I'm not quite going there yet, but I think, we're obviously going to see some changes as some of these Big 12 teams are saying they're not going to play. I think it's a shame for the young players who, often look at that extra, 2 weeks of practice and get something out of it.
Yeah. I mean, Notre Dame is also a whole nother show, right? This system contorts itself around the Irish, right? To an extent that would be laughed at in any other sports league or walk of life. How does one school have as much impact as the Irish, right? In the system, in the CFP system that is basically ending this winter, Notre Dame had 18 times the voting power of Ohio State, because Ohio State was 1/18 of the Big Ten, which had one vote. Notre Dame had one vote. So Notre Dame and the Big Ten, equal amount of sway in the CFP system. And they've got the little carve out as an independent, they got to go through the at-large and all that. The system has just basically said, we'll do whatever is required to keep Notre Dame happy and to give them fair and easy access. Their former athletic director, Jack Swarbrick, was part of the group of 4 that created this current system. I don't really have much sympathy for them. Their biggest problem, frankly, and then I'll stop and let you talk. Their biggest problem is their partnership with the ACC. The ACC stinks this year, and they're playing all those games against ACC teams, which means their strength of schedule stunk. So their problem is that that 10-game winning streak, they played one good team in there, USC. They don't have enough quality wins. If they had played a couple of teams in the ACC that were good and ranked, that would have prevented them from falling into the resume showdown with Miami. They would have been ranked higher. They would have avoided the head-to-head Miami situation. But they partnered with the weakest of the conferences, and that's a benefit to them, but it's also a curse.
The bowl games moving forward, what jumps out to you when you look at the bowl
I'm off
schedule?
my Notre Dame rant.
Yeah.
So, well, timing-wise, we're going to record again before most of these start.
Yeah.
But Washington is up first on Saturday, the 13th. The Huskies play in the LA Bowl. I don't know if it's presented by Gronk or Tom Brady or Steve Grogan. I don't remember. But they're playing Boise State in the LA Bowl next Saturday. What do you? How do you think Washington thinks about this?
Yeah, it's weird. It's weird, and I don't even know what Boise State thinks of it. Yeah,
That's true.
and I don't know. These bowl games come down to often which team wants to be there more, and
Yeah.
I think it more than ever in this bowl season, we're going to have to really look these teams in the eyes and figure it out who wants to be there. I mean, you have another bowl game. It's got a matchup of future Pac-12 schools that is interesting to me from that standpoint, because we're going to get to see sort of this class comparison within the New World Conference. But I'm looking at some of these games and I'm just going, gosh, does either one of these teams want to be in the game? But the thing is, we're all going to tune in and we're all going to watch it. They're made for TV. You've got to figure out a way, if you're the Bulls, to incentivize this, to get the players interested, to get, maybe it's an NIL deal for the winning team. What is it? Is there money at stake? Is something else at stake? I don't know. But, I'm looking at this and I'm having a hard time getting enthusiastic about the entire bowl season, but I do see some interesting little tidbits here and there.
I was thinking, I mean, you're right. There wouldn't be this many bowls if they didn't make sense for ESPN, right? I mean, they draw 10 times the audience that ESPN would get for some rinky-dink billiards or studio show. I'm thinking about Washington, Boise. You got to figure Boise will be fired up about playing Washington.
Should be.
Washington
Maybe.
probably not going to be fired up about playing Boise. Washington thought they might be going to the playoff a month ago. If you're a Husky fan, and I had told you before the season, you're going to go 8-4 and play Boise in the LA Bowl, how would you have reacted?
Yeah, they're not happy with that. Jed's got to go. What's Jed doing? We played for a national championship a couple of years ago. What are we doing now?
Boise.
LA.
Yeah.
It doesn't move the needle. I even wonder about the Boise fans, because, last year it was a playoff for Boise. And that was the expectation at the beginning of the year. It was a disappointing year. Now, look, I love the way they played in the conference championship game. They're a 7-time Mountain West Conference champion. They beat UNLV on the way out the door. They're going off into the new conference. A lot of momentum in Boise, but it was a disappointing season by their standards, and a little bit underwhelming and disappointing. But look, I think if you're a bettor, you're looking at this game and you're going, I think Boise, will fly around in this game, and Washington might not.
Absolutely. Yep. And you wonder who's gonna be opting out, especially for the Huskies. The other game I thought we should touch on now is the Potato Bowl. Utah State against Washington State, and the main reason is not because of the game itself, but because of the Cougars coaching situation.
Yes.
I was actually in the car driving back from Berkeley and the Tosh Lupoy introductory press conference when all the stuff happened with Jimmy Rogers and Iowa State. I guess I hadn't really thought he was going to be so high on Iowa State's list that it would happen within minutes, hours of Matt Campbell taking the Penn State job. What did you think of that?
Well, I think, it really, if you go back to the domino effect of this, it's Penn State losing patience with James Franklin. It's Penn State botching their search and waiting so long to get to Matt Campbell and hire him. It puts Washington State in a position where Jimmy Rogers is literally signing 20-something players, and then within 48 hours saying, see ya, I'm out of here. I'm getting on a plane. I'm going to Iowa State, and it's a better job. Fine, it's a better job, but the timing of this couldn't have been worse for Washington State. Puts them in a bad position. John Harlow, the interim athletic director of Washington State, has to be drinking out of a fire hydrant right now with people, pandering and trying to get their client in on this job. He's got a less than ideal situation. Couple of names that have come up. I have talked to a number of people who are interested in this search. I mean, obviously, you go right away to Montana State's Brett Vegan, and you start thinking about him, and then you think about Brian Harsin at Cal, that he's available, and then you start to go down the list of potential candidates. But I think you have to go a little outside the box. I do know that Rick Neuheisel has been in contact with John Harlow, the interim AD at Washington State. It's very early. It's preliminary stuff, but the pitch is being made that Neuheisel comes in as the head coach and he brings Jerry in as his offensive coordinator, his son Jerry. And we interviewed Neuheisel on this show a couple weeks ago, and it came up in that interview, Wilner, where he was talking about, he thinks about it every day. He thinks about getting into coaching every day. I actually think it would be an interesting outside the box hire, much like, Dick Bennett and Tony Bennett coming in basketball a few years ago, but less than ideal. And I think Washington State knows it has to move quickly.
What do you think about Jonathan Smith?
I think it's someone you talk with. I just don't know if he right now is going to have the appetite, given that he's being paid $33 million to not coach. Is he going to want to jump on the first job and a job that is tough? I think it's interesting to see guys like Jim Mora and Rick Neuheisel running towards the Pac-12 because they see sort of a throwback to another time where you could develop players and you could coach players. And hey, the conference champion here has got a puncher's chance to be in the playoff every year. And gosh, wouldn't it be more fun to coach in this kind of conference versus maybe the SEC or the Big Ten where it's like kill or be killed? And so, if that still appeals to Jonathan Smith, maybe he makes a run at it. But I actually think he might sit back a little bit in this cycle and sit 1 year out, or maybe go to work as a coordinator for somebody in another conference, as opposed to coming in as the guy who is going to be in charge in Pullman. And, oh, by the way, there's a big hole in your budget. You better get busy fundraising. Terrible, bad look to stop at Goodwill. I don't know if it was his idea, his wife's idea. I mean, he fell on the sword, but bad look on your way out of town to stop at the Goodwill. It caused a lot of bad feelings. Had he just packed the stuff up and dropped it two towns over, he would have been fine. He dropped it in Corvallis on their way out of town and didn't really see how that would be greeted. Didn't think about it getting put on the shelves the next day. So I think no, I don't think he's got a place there. And I don't think, Oregon State did not want him back. They didn't seriously consider him when they hired Jamarcus Shepard. They talked to Justin Wilcox in the 11th hour. They ran out all these other ground balls, but Jonathan Smith was not one of them. And seemingly the Beavers had moved on from Smith. I think some of the way he left just kind of left a bad feeling in everybody's mouth, but I don't know. Look, if you're Washington State and Jonathan Smith wants to come, you hire him. If Brent Vegan wants to come, you seriously consider him maybe as, your primary option. If Brian Harsin wants to take it, you interview him. But Rick Neuheisel's in the room, and it gives you a high ceiling move, and a chance maybe to do something more like what they did with Mike Leach once upon a time.
Yep. The timing is tough, except in one regard, because they changed the transfer portal rule now. So the portal opens January 2nd. If they wanted to wait for Vegan, the FCS championship game, I believe, is the 5th of January. Players have to wait 5 days until 5 days after the new coach is hired before they can enter the portal. So Washington State is not facing the same portal pressure this winter that it did last year when it went and hired Jimmy Rogers. So there's more reason. If they think Vegan is the guy, they can wait and not get toasted by the portal. I think their first call probably needs to be to Jason Eck. I'm sure he's going to say no. And
he's going to say no. Yeah. I talked to Eck like 3 weeks ago, and we talked about Oregon State and Colorado State. He wasn't interested in those jobs. I think he felt like he was in, is it a step up? You and I could say it's a step up into the Pac-12. I think most people would view New Mexico to Colorado State as a step up, or New Mexico to Oregon State as a step up. Sure. But it's not a big enough step up. He can do what he needs to do at New Mexico. Yes. And oh, by the way, next year, he doesn't have to play Boise State. He doesn't have to play San Diego State. He just has to deal with UNLV.
The one thing I do wonder about Washington State is they have, as opposed to last year, they have got a president who cares, right? Betsy Cantwell, who, interestingly enough, a year ago was at Utah State and hired Bronco Mendenhall away from New Mexico. Big swing there. And she got an established head coach who I think is going to do very well for the Aggies. That makes me wonder, will she kind of, especially without a permanent AD, will she kind of follow that model and go for a proven head coach, whether it's a Neuheisel or a Vegan, or or take the coordinator route? I think she's going to follow that model and try to hire somebody who has been a winner as a head coach.
Well, that would lead you to Brent Vegan at Montana State. I mean, I think, and the big thing with him, Oregon State liked him a lot. They got pretty far down the road with Vegan. he did not want to leave his team. He wanted to coach throughout the FCS playoffs, and Oregon State kind of just backed away from the table at that point. And they ended up with Jamarcus Shepard, who they really like right now and who has energized people in his news conference. By the way, did you see that? Did you see him as he made rounds? He came on my show. He was electric.
Yes, he was. I watched the whole news conference. He is electric, and that counts for something.
Yep.
But so does NIL money and revenue share and who his coordinators are, especially on the defensive side. I think he's got a chance to succeed if he's got the money. If they can muster the resources for him, he's got a chance. But the way things are going right now in Corvallis, I'm not confident in anything.
I liked one thing he did, though. It was the day after Thanksgiving. It was Black Friday morning when the news broke. But, his agent was talking with Oregon State seriously on the Wednesday night before Thanksgiving. I mean, they were engaged in negotiations. And it turns out that the thing they were hung up on was Jamarcus Shepard wanted a general manager. Scott Barnes, told me he wasn't sure football needed a GM. And Jamarcus Shepard wisely had his agent said that was a deal breaker. He needed a general manager so that he could focus on coaching the football. And for me, that was the first time, like, if we're looking for evidence of, hey, he can be a CEO, I saw it there. Mm-hmm. I like his energy. I think he'll recruit. He'll get players that maybe Trent Bray could not have brought to Oregon State. I think the old regime, this last regime in the last 2 years, did a terrible job recruiting.
Yep.
But you're right. It does come down to your resources. It's a race for resources in the New World Pac-12. And Boise State's at the front. So you have to go after Boise, and you have to raise what they're going to raise. You have to get people excited. And then Jamarcus Shepard, you're right. First-year head coach. He's going to have a play caller who's not done it either. And that generally doesn't line up. Nope. And so they're going to have to figure out a way to make that not matter as much as it has mattered in other places.
Yeah. And the defensive side, his background is on offense, which means the defensive coordinator is his most important hire. So we shall see who he ends up with.
I love it. All right. So tell us in the comment section, what do we want to know, Wilner? I want to know what our viewers and our listeners thought of the bracket right when it came out. What was your first thought? Yep. I want to know too, how many teams do you think legitimately can win this thing? I look at it and I go, Ohio State, Georgia, Indiana, maybe there's a place for Texas Tech or Oregon, the winner of that game, to knock Indiana out and be disruptive. But I think it's really like 3 or 4 teams that can win this thing, and the rest are just playing. Yeah. So I want people in the comment section, tell me how many teams you actually think can win it.
Yep. One of the teams I think can win it is not in it. That's Notre Dame.
Yes.
The other thing, tell us in the comment section, is if you like 12 or you think it should go to 16 because Notre Dame's not in it, Texas not in it, Vanderbilt, BYU, worthy teams. The bubble was much stronger this year than it was last year. This would have been a great year for 16. So do you want to stay at 12? You want 16? You want 20, 24? Definitely let us know.
I think 16 and no buys. Get rid of the buys. Everybody plays. One plays 16. Let's do it. All right. Make sure you like and subscribe. Read me at johncanzano.com. Find him at wilnerhotline.com. And we're back next week with an all-new episode.
Thanks, everybody.